This is the Money Loves Women podcast, the podcast that guides women to wealth and an extraordinary life. Here's your host, Dr. Deborah Ekstrom.
This is Dr. Deborah Ekstrom for the Money Loves Women podcast. I'd like to welcome Gina Zakaria. And Gina is a personal finance, she calls herself an educator, but I think she's a personal finance whiz because she does something called Saving Whiz. And she has been featured in some of the greatest money space magazines, including Money Magazine, Forbes. She's also been on Good Morning America, NBC Today, and other prominent financial sites. So welcome to the program, Gina. And before we get going, hearing about Saving Whiz and all the educating you've done for women over the years, the past 20 years you've been in the money and finance area. Tell us a little bit about yourself real quick. Tell us where you grew up, how you grew up, what your influences were, and then segue into how you got involved in the money and personal finance space.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and be able to chat with you about all things money because it's something that excites me very much. I started really in the space of banking when I was a teenager. Actually, it was one of my high school jobs. And then I went into college and I was supposed to go into something completely different and found myself in a career of finance. So I'm a financial analyst by trade. And basically what I do is I manage big corporations, budgets and forecasting, and I figure out how they can actually use their budget wisely. But I couldn't do the same thing for myself. So years down the line, I was doing great at work and found myself struggling financially. We were in a lot of debt. I had two small kids at the time, and my husband and I were living paycheck to paycheck because of it. I didn't know how to manage my money, didn't really want to do a budget. And I thought that the things that are supposed to be meant as tools to help me were the things that were going to restrict me. So I tried to avoid them as much as possible. And that only led to more and more struggling until one day I realized, after my husband had talked to me about it so many times, that maybe we should try a budget. Maybe we should have things in place so that we can plan ahead for our spending. And once we started to do more of those things, I realized that it's actually something that can free up my energy, my time, give me more peace of mind knowing that I know where my money is going. And when I started paying off debt and realized that there were a lot of little saving strategies that nobody really talks about, I wanted to talk about them. So I started telling my friends, like my real life friends. And my oldest daughter, who's now almost 22, was like, why aren't you blogging about this? Like, I think more people need to know about this. And so I started a blog in 2017. And then I went on TikTok in 2020 and I started just sharing things as I was cooking dinner or really just casually sharing it as if I'm talking to a friend, because that's really what I was doing, was talking to my online friends about it. And I was able to help thousands of women be able to take control of their money, get out of debt. Some of them bought their first homes, and it's been really exciting. So it's just such a passion of mine to help women be able to conquer this because it's something we don't learn in school many of the times.
That's a really great story, Gina. I love it. And it's also great to know that you can have an education in finance and be working in finance and still not necessarily have your hands around what you need to do for your own personal finance. So, teach us today. We're your friends here too. So teach us, where do you start? You started right at the beginning. You decided to set up your spending plan. So tell us how you went about that and how you recommend to other people that go about that.
So one of the biggest takeaways that I've learned over the years is that the smaller the steps, the easier it is for you to overcome them and you don't feel intimidated. So starting with my budget, the first thing that I did was let me back up. The first time I ever created a budget, it was super unrealistic. It was that ideal budget, the perfect budget that I wanted it to be, and it did not work at all, no matter how hard I tried. Then what I realized was I actually need to create a budget that reflects how I spend my money now. So I started taking my current spending rates, which was my bank account and my credit card spending. And I looked at those and I started highlighting those expenses based on categories. So let's say groceries was in green, shopping was in pink, takeout was in yellow, whatever the colors were. And then I added them up over a 2 to 3 month period and averaged them out so that I knew what my spend rate was. I could not create a budget until I knew how I spent my money first. Once I had that, I could use those numbers and plug them into a budget and then see really where my income was in comparison to how I was spending my money. And then I could adjust. So it was really going back to where am I starting from and using my specific spending rates, because I can tell people all day long to create this perfect budget and have the 50/30/20 rule and all those things, but if you're not using your real numbers, it's not going to work for you. So it's not just a plug and play. You actually have to use your real life numbers. And that's where I would start.
That's a great recommendation, and how smart for you to see that. So you took your real life numbers and then you started to plug those into your budget. Did you have to trim those real life numbers in order to get where you wanted to be, or how did you make the next step?
Oh, yeah. I had to trim them very much. The first thing that I noticed was I was spending excessively on food, and that's something that most of us justify because obviously it's a sustenance. We have to have food in order to survive. And so that's a given, and it's something that is not considered frivolous, so we should be able to spend money on food with whatever budget it is, right? But I realized quickly that there were so many things that I could do to save money on food without sacrificing what I was eating or what I was feeding my family. So that was the very first place I noticed that this could probably get fixed. And my mom was really the biggest catalyst for this part because we'd be on the phone a lot while I was grocery shopping. And I never really shopped with her as a kid. So as an adult, it was all new to me. And I'd go to the grocery store and then she'd be on the phone with me and she's like, "Oh, well, how much are tomatoes at that store?" And I would tell her and she goes, "Oh, no, that's so expensive." And I'm like, there's a difference in price in tomatoes from store to store. I had no idea. I was completely unaware of that. And then she started teaching me little by little that there are stores that have better deals on produce or stores that have sales, and started kind of showing me what to do. And the first couple of weeks, I saved about $50, $100. And I was like, whoa, I didn't realize I could save that much money. So then it became sort of like a game. Okay, how much more can I save the following week? All right, what else can I add to this equation? And the more I started working on that kind of stuff, I realized it's not just about what you're doing in the store. It's also what you're doing at home. It's how you're organizing your time. It's how you're planning your meals out. And I went from like $1,200 a month, which was my low average. I used to spend a lot more than that, to about $400 a month just by paying attention to small little details. That's why I always say start small and you'll always move forward. So I started with my grocery budget. As soon as I noticed on my budget, my actual budget sheet, that my groceries were an issue, that's where I started. So
Excellent.
look at your most problem area first.
I noticed that you talked about takeout as being one of your line items.
Yeah.
Did you change how much takeout you were doing at that point? Was that
Yeah.
costing you money?
Takeout is still one of my favorite things to have in my budget, but it can add up really quickly. So what I've started to do maybe about 8 years ago is something called takeout fake out. And basically what it is recreating my favorite takeout dishes at home. So I minimize the amount of takeout I have. So instead of eliminating it completely, it's still on my budget. I still give myself permission to have it, but in smaller quantities. So now I just make those things at home.
Okay, perfect. It's interesting because some recipe magazines will have the takeout fake out recipes. Have the actual
Yes.
recipes, especially when some favorite takeout menu item gets taken off the menu, and people go, "Oh no, I need this," and then they have recipes for it. So that's really great. You talked about planning meals, and I know we're not only talking about food here, but Meal planning, the American public throws out about 25% of the food they buy. So when you can meal plan and then shop to your meals, did you find that helped you not have to buy so much food?
Yeah, very much so. It's not just about meal planning for me, it's also about prepping food and storing it in a way that I can keep it for longer. So I do this a lot with the things that I use on a daily basis, things like chopped onions or minced garlic. I use it for some of my veggies that I'm going to cook with on a regular basis. The more that I can process and preserve in the freezer, the easier it is for me to make my meals. So it's part of my planning stage, even though I might not be cooking ahead all of the time. There are things that are already made and ready for me so that when I do start cooking, it's just really assembling a lot of the things instead of having to chop a bunch of things when I'm tired and it's towards the end of the day.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I actually prep early in the morning because
Oh,
I
okay.
find at the end of the day, I'm not very creative and I'm hungry and and if it's ready to go, I completely agree with you if it's ready to go. And at times I have a prep cook and it's not that easy to find somebody who's really good at that.
Yeah.
They have to be both creative and good at it. And my ideal is to have a prep cook who can who can follow my recipes, follow my food rules and make the menus in advance. And that's not easy to find.
Mm,
Um, at
I can
least not in a
imagine.
small place. Yeah. But anyway, great. So you started with food because you saw that you're spending a lot of money there.
Yeah.
And then mom got on board and helped you figure that out. So I think that one of the take home messages is for us as moms to teach our kids how to do that, right? Home economics. They don't teach it in school anymore.
No. It's
So
so sad that they don't.
yeah, how do you get good food and not have to spend too much money? So that's excellent. So tell me more about the simple small steps because I know that's been a huge secret to your success in terms of bringing your students along.
Yeah, so it's what I love about it is it's not intimidating because money in general feels complicated. There's a lot of jargon words that are being thrown out there, and it can feel complex. And when you're trying to tackle your money journey and everything kind of feels like it's chaotic, throwing a bunch of rules and different um, systems that are complicated can make you feel too scared to take the first step. So I'm always trying to find very small steps. I did that with groceries. We also do that with bills. So a lot of people think that my bills are set, there's nothing I can do about them. This is what it is. But you can even take small steps with your bills to save money. You can you can call your providers and see if you can negotiate rates. You can see if they have um, savings strategies on their website. A lot of providers do, like energy bills. There's a lot of programs out there that you can join so that you can actually get your energy bill to cost less. And it's not like you're sacrificing extra AC or you're not comfortable in your house, you can still be comfortable and still save money. So there's ways that you can essentially save money without sacrificing your lifestyle, without sacrificing your preferences. But a lot of times we think that whatever it is right now is set and I have to work around it. And that's not usually the case. And a lot of people also think that you have to be making more money in order for you to be set. And that was one of my biggest hurdles as well, in that I thought I'm not making enough money. I need to get to a place where I'm making more money. That's the problem here. And it wasn't the income that was the problem. It was how I was managing and spending it that was the issue. So I think with every single area of our budget, if we look at just taking tiny steps, maybe just making a phone call to the provider, or if we have a lot of debt, writing a list of our debt and figuring out how we want to tackle that. That's one small step. It's not going to make a huge difference, but in the grand scheme of things, at least now I've organized my debt. And then the next small step might be, well, how can I make an extra $50 a month to that piece of debt or $100 per month? And then you build on it. So it's all about starting where you are, starting small so it doesn't feel intimidating, and building as you go so you have more confidence when you're moving forward.
So let me ask you a question about how you run money in your marriage. Is your husband the CFO? Are you the CFO? Do you do everything together? Do you share those tasks? Do you have differences in your attitudes toward money, or did you before? Give me a little insight into that.
So I actually have a discussion with a lot of my members. They talk about, well, how do I get my spouse on board? And I'm like, I was the spouse that needed to be on board. It was not my husband at all. He's a great budgeter. Actually, he's a budgeter by passion, but he's also an accountant by trade. So he loves that kind of like numbers and like adding things up and making sure things align. And I was the one who had to get on board. Once I did, what we did was we created a system where we're working as like teammates, but we've created roles. So there are things that he takes care of inside of our budget, and there are things I take care of inside of our budget. That way we have autonomy, and we can figure out how does Gina want to handle this? How does he want to handle his part? And then we come together and we talk about our plans for the future, what we want to move forward with, what things we still need to work on, those kinds of things. So right now, currently, he takes care of all of the fixed bills. So he'll call the providers, make sure he negotiates the rates, make sure that the rates aren't increasing gradually without us paying attention. He does all of that. We don't have any debt right now. We just have our mortgage. So he'll look at those things and see, okay, what is our mortgage tax? What's going on in these areas that we can either take control of or minimize. And then I take care of most of the variable expenses, which are things like the groceries, the lifestyle bills, the takeout, the vacations, the fun things is what I call them. All the things that we like to do, but we have to do in moderation so that we're still hitting our goal marks. And then we come together maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks and touch base. Okay, how is the spending going with the variable expenses? Which company do you need to call this week to figure out if we can negotiate our bill? And we work together in that way, but also separately. So it works perfectly because we have that space to make our own decisions as well.
So it sounds like you guys got together and decided how to set up your system so it works for you, particularly as individuals.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of the key, is to sit down with your spouse and say, okay, what are you going to take care of? What am I going to take care of? And how's it going to happen? And then how often are we going to talk about it? You don't actually schedule specific time to have these conversations, or do you?
I know that many people do, and I think it's necessary if you haven't been on the same page for a while. For us, because we've been on the same page for over 10 years now, we don't schedule them in, but we kind of do them as they're needed. So maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks as they're needed. But a lot of times we don't need to schedule them in because we find that if it's moving smoothly and we're both on top of things and everything's going well, there's no need for a meeting. But if there's something that happened or there's a change that's going to occur or a goal has been adjusted a little bit, then maybe we have a meeting so that we can clarify that so we know how to move forward separately with our roles.
Gina, how do you handle it? You talked to us about your groceries. You got really smart about your spending on food, your meal planning, your meal prepping. You figured that all out little bit by little bit, step by step, it sounds like. Your husband took care of the fixed expenses. He's negotiating the rates, checking them, watching to make sure things aren't happening that shouldn't. Subscriptions aren't getting extended that shouldn't. And we need to watch companies on that, don't we? Because sometimes they put things in place that they shouldn't. And we already know about that with Wells Fargo. So I've got to watch that. Now, you talked about how you were in charge of the lifestyle. So if you were going on a vacation, you plan a certain number of vacations per year and budget some money toward that? Or do you have a separate account that some money automatically goes into that? Or how do you deal with things like that? And how about kids?
Yeah, so we definitely have something called set and get funds. I know a lot of financial creators actually call them sinking funds. I find that sinking is kind of a negative for me. So we've called it set and get so that you're setting up what the budget's going to be so that you can get to that goal. And we have one for vacations. We have one for holidays, for birthdays, for gifts, because I want to make sure that we go on vacation every year, at least once, and maybe some mini vacations kind of sprinkled in. And with kids, what I found was, and that was one of the reasons why I actually created my platform, was because I could not find voices that spoke to managing your finances while you had small kids. I didn't want my kids to feel like they weren't having fun or that we couldn't create memories or be able to go on vacations. But at the same time, I wanted to find a way to pay off my debt and get to the savings goals that we had. So having your kids be on board and involved in it, I think makes a huge difference. Number one, they build financial confidence without it being their physical money yet. So they start to understand what it's like to manage money, even if it's on a small scale. So I remember when my kids were really small, I think they were like, I want to say like 8 and 13. We talked about a budget. I said, look, this is what our budget is, and this is what we're going to be doing. And there's certain things that we have to put on like a wait list to buy if it's not something that we were thinking of buying to begin with. That's called impulse spending. And I was teaching them what that meant. And we walked into, I think, a Big Lots. I was going in for a specific thing. So I went in, got the specific thing, put it in the cart. And then I always go to like the makeup aisle and I was looking at this makeup and I found something and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really intriguing. It's only a couple of bucks. I put it in my cart without thinking, right? Impulse spending. And my little one, who was 8 at the time, she goes, Mom, um, that's not part of our spending for today. That wasn't part of the plan. And it wasn't that she said we couldn't afford it. It's that she knows Mom had a plan. Mom is deviating from the plan. I must speak up. So she did, called me out, and I put it back. But it was this idea that she's paying attention to what I'm saying and she's watching what I'm doing. So if we're constantly talking to our kids and teaching them what it's like to have healthy habits with our money, they will also grow up to have healthy habits. I've never once told my kids we can't afford something. What I usually say is, listen, right now, these are the goals that we have. And until these goals are met, we have to put these things on a waiting list or on hold until we get to this place, because that's not the priority right now. The priority is ABC, right? And they fully understand that and they don't feel like they're coming from a scarce place. It's more that we have priorities and these are the priorities, and then we can always move on to other goals later once we finish those.
That's so smart, Gina. So I think it is very easy. And I think a lot of people are worried about that if they put a budget together or they put a spending plan together, that they're going to be living in scarcity and that they're not going to, have fulfilling purchases or whatever it is. But you just made it clear that you made it into a game, you made it into priorities, and brought it to an intention and to consciousness and awareness. And it seems to me like that's the perfect balance. So great. That's really great. So you married an accountant and you're in finance. How long did it take you to get out of debt?
So we had over $106,000 of debt, and most of it was higher interest debt. And it took us about a little less than 5 years. And a lot of people look at that and say, oh, that's unbelievable. That how could you do that if you're just on accountant salaries or on finance salaries? And it was really because we took all of the wasteful spending that we had and we minimized it and put all of that towards our debt, and then use strategies like manually consolidating our debt into one credit card that had a 0% APR for like 12 months so that we can really catch up on those payments. And then once we were done with that, we would move on to the next one. So yeah, we had a lot of debt, but we were able to pay it off in less than 5 years with regular salaries.
Did you negotiate down any of that debt?
At the time, none of them were in collection, so it's a little harder to negotiate them, but you can negotiate your interest rates. So if your lender or if your credit card provider sees that you've been a great customer, you're always making your payments on time, a lot of time they have some leverage to be able to lower your interest rate, especially if they have promotional offers at the time. And if you've been receiving pre-approvals from other companies, you can use that to leverage more opportunities to lower your interest rates to save money. And we talk a lot about that inside of the community because I want people to know there are always options for you to lower the amount that you're paying. You just have to find the right way to do it and the tools to get you there.
Yes, you have to know that tools exist in the first place. I can see how
Exactly.
passionate you are about this, Gina.
Yes, very
Congratulations.
much.
If people want to get more involved in your approach and learn some of this, um, you have some teaching methods, right? You have some teaching platform that they can access. What is that teaching platform?
Yeah, so they can go to my blog, savingwiz.com. I also have a community, a private community, and that's on it's membership.savingwiz.com.
Right. So, the method you talked about to take care of debt, it's also a way that you can maximize your income toward things that are in your goals, the things you really love. Minimize what you don't care about, and see if you can squeeze some extra money out of there to learn to invest. So once you get out of debt, or even before, if you can, to find some ways to develop your funds for your investment. And I like the idea of setting investment money aside every certain periods, whatever period you decide on. I want to ask you something else, because I suspect that during the time you were doing this, you or your husband, or maybe both of you, had some increases in pay during that time. How
Yeah.
did you handle that? What did you do with the difference between what you were making and what you started making after you got promoted or got an increase in salary? What did you do with that extra money? How did you manage that?
We tried to ignore that we got it and put it towards whatever goals we had. I think the biggest issue in today's like workforce space is that as we increase our income, we increase our lifestyle, and that creeps up over time very gradually. We don't even realize we're doing it, but we're like, oh, as soon as I get this raise, I'm going to get that new car. As soon as I get this raise, I'm going to upgrade my house. As soon as I get this raise, I'm going to go buy that new whatever it is that we want. And we don't give ourselves a chance to actually use that extra windfall of money to put towards the things that are urgently needing it right now so that we can actually set ourselves up for success. And that's what we were doing. So anytime we got a bonus or we got an increase in income, we always used it either to pay off our debt, or if we didn't have any debt at that time, we would use it towards our savings goals.
Got it. Got it. So you were very intentional with that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Any other great tips for people? I mean, well, before we go on to that, though, let me ask you one more question. During that time when you were paying off debt, were you doing any investing at all, or just saving in your 401ks or your retirement stuff? Was that the limit of what you could do for investing?
We did invest, but we invested very little at the time because we had such high interest credit card debt. If we were just paying off student loans, we could maybe put more towards our investing. But at the time, we really wanted to make sure that we were putting our money in the right place to save us more money over time. So
Sure.
yeah, we were investing based on there were some matching programs in some of the places that we worked. Other times there were no matching programs. So what we would do is just put the minimum just so that we got used to the habit of investing
Yes.
while we were paying off our debt. And then once we paid it off, we would increase. And so now we're at a place where we're actually maxing out our investments every single year.
Gina, aside from putting money in your retirement plan, which is a great place to do, especially when you get matching funds, right? A
Mhm.
great place to put your investment money. What's your philosophy around investing in your money education? And what is your philosophy around where you should start with your investing outside of your retirement?
That's a really great question. One of my biggest things is when we invest, we usually invest in abstract things. We're talking about retirement or we're talking about growing our wealth, and all that is very great. It's very nice to have those goals. When you're not investing in yourself, though, it's hard for you to make the right decisions and have the confidence to make those decisions without feeling like you're going to make a mistake. And it can, again, feel very intimidating. I'm a firm believer that if you don't invest in your education, if you don't invest in understanding what you need to know, it's going to be really hard for you to make those moves. Surrounding yourself with the right people, understanding the entire space of this specific topic would help so much more than you just trying to go about it with very surface level information. The more deep you can get with the knowledge, the more successful you can become. So I think that that is a huge thing.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. Having been down that road and not having had enough education and losing money, if you make the first rule, don't lose money, that doesn't mean tuck it away in your mattress either. But the first rule is don't lose money, and the way you don't lose money is by educating yourself as an investor. But it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. So my experience has been that you can get your college education and so forth, but some of the best investments are the practical ones where you're learning from people who've done it and are passionate about teaching others to do the same thing. So thank you so much for you teaching other women how to do this. It's so critical, right? It's so critical to learn that, and so that they can develop that excess cash flow to create money for their investments and to invest in themselves to learn. And sometimes it's expensive. Sometimes it's expensive to learn how to do it because you're learning from some of the best, and it's very valuable information. So thank you for that input. I completely agree with every single thing you've said. I think you are so brilliant to be on this track, and you're so inspirational because of where you've come from and how you managed it. And thank you for being vulnerable and telling us that you weren't perfect, because everybody else thinks other people know more than they do and are more perfect, and sometimes can shame and blame themselves for their performance. And it's kind of crazy to do that because, after all, nobody teaches us, and we have to go out and learn it. It's hard to do it when you have kids and a job and a husband and his career, and all of those things get in the way. But the good news is there's plenty of books and training out there that are not terribly expensive to get you the base foundation. And after that, you can pick and choose. And I know it's different for different people. Your investment desires and interest area might be different than mine, but I like what you said about find an area and go deep, really get great expertise and learn it so that you make good decisions. And I think that's what they're talking about when they say invest wisely. I was talking to one of my coaches today about that, investing wisely. And I said, we get taught that all the time, invest wisely. But what is investing wisely? And I think investing wisely is with good education and mentors. If you have to pay them, pay them. People who've been there, done that. And good for you, because you're teaching women how to get the money that they need in order to invest and get rid of their debt and live a life of financial freedom. So thank you so much for doing that. And women, thank you from everywhere.
Thank you. One of the things I just,
yes,
when you were talking, there was one thing that like really struck me, and I just have to share. So one of the things that I feel like a lot of people go through is when they, especially when they're starting with their money, they come from that place of scarcity. Like they're trying to save every penny, and that's all great. But the issue is that if you don't invest in yourself, what ends up happening is it costs you money from another way, because you're going to fall into pitfalls that you didn't know were coming because you don't know what you don't know. So if you're not investing in yourself, you will end up using what you could have invested in yourself, and it will be a loss in another way. So it's really important that you do invest in yourself, which is why I'm super passionate about this. So thank you so much for allowing me to share.
Yes, absolutely. So true. Invest in your own education, invest in finding the people who can guide you so you don't make mistakes. Yeah, cutting that little edge off the learning curve is so important, right?
For sure.
So agree. Once again, I agree with you completely. If you were going to give women some counsel and some advice on how they could become more successful right here and now from your experience, your training, and the things you've learned, sometimes the hard way, what would you say?
Number one, really get clear on what you want from your life. What do you imagine your dream life to look like? And then reverse engineer it. And the way that you'd reverse engineer it is really picking those very small steps to inch towards that life, so that as you're going through it, you are building that confidence and building the momentum to get there. A lot of times we start with like, oh, I just want to save money on groceries. Okay, but what's the end game? Like, where's that money going? Are you just saving it and putting it into a savings account and watching it grow and thinking that that's the end goal? Or is there an actual end goal of, I want to be able to have financial freedom. I want to be able to have time freedom. I want to be able to have the freedom to spend time with my aging parents, or be able to spend time with my young kids while they're needing me most. what is the actual end goal? I think sometimes we lose sight of that. So get really crystal clear on your end goal. That would be the very first step.
Excellent advice and excellent counsel. Thank you so very much. So figure out what your dream life is and work backwards from it, and then take the first step.
Yes, 100%.
I like it. Thank you very much. Tell us one more time, when we want to get involved in money education and utilize your platform, how do we do that?
You can go to savingwhiz.com, which is the blog, or if you want to join my private community where we have more group coaching and I can actually have access to you and we can talk directly about your specific situation, that would be membership.savingwhiz.com.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This is
Thanks a
Dr. Deborah Ekstrom from the Money Loves Women podcast. To your health, to your wealth, and to your happiness. And if you want to learn more and get involved in this mission that both Gina and I are involved in, go and find out more at info@savingwiz.com, or come and visit us at moneyloveswomen.com and listen to the podcast and get involved in our community. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Money Loves Women podcast. Please leave us a rating and review so we know how we can improve. Visit moneyloveswomen.com to gain more insight into how to live an extraordinary life.